I'm going to try to convey three things to you today for you to think about as part of this conference and go home and hopefully think about some more. The first is place matters, and the second is we need urban and rural interests to work together for solutions. And the third is what works in one place won't necessarily work in others. So I want to talk about each of those in the context of two quick examples, and I am going to try to be fast here. The first is with regard to infrastructure. Now, when you think about DEQ, you might not think about infrastructure, but part of our infrastructure is, in addition to roads, wastewater and water infrastructure. And the example that I want to use comes to us from Central Oregon. And so how did urban and rural interest intersect there, or how do they intersect there? We have the city of Bend. We heard earlier it's the fastest growing area in the state of Oregon. It's making significant demands on water resources. That's putting stress on a river and on water quality and on fish. We also have that area, some of the highest value added agriculture in the state of Oregon in irrigation districts. And finally, we have a number of endangered species, including the spotted frog as well as several fishery species. So that area has come together, and we have irrigation districts leading the way, working with citizens, working with the city of Bend to put together a program where through investments in infrastructure, in this case in terms of water use efficiency, we can leave more water in stream so that we have better water quality and so that we have better habitat for the species that depend on them. That's a solution that really demonstrates how the urban people in the city of Bend are actually dependent on the rural folks in those irrigation districts for the holistic solution to how to manage water in that basin. I think that's the type of holistic solution that we need to be working to find across the state. The second example I want to use to really illustrate what works in one place doesn't necessarily work in another is on the regulatory side, and that is how most people think about the Department of Environmental Quality. Part of our mission is to protect public health, and fundamentally we need to assure Oregonians that public health is protected. We're currently in the midst of developing a new program around industrial air toxics called Cleaner Air Oregon that was launched by Governor Brown about a year ago. And Governor Brown has stated certain key principles that we need to meet for this program. We need to assure the public that we're protecting public health. We also need to provide a framework for our business community so that they have some predictability about what is required, what's not required. They know what the rules of the game are and they can act accordingly. So how does that play out on the ground? Well, here in Portland, where we have, as we've just talked about a little bit, a lot of density, mixed use, a lot of business and transportation facilities that are right next to residential neighborhoods, we have significant health impacts on our communities in this urban area because the density and the number of people and the amount of activity that we have in the area. So we need solutions for the Portland area that deal with those emissions and deal with our existing business community in a way that doesn't drive business away, but that protects folks in those communities. So what about a small community on the coast that has a single lumber mill? And that lumber mill provides many of the jobs for that community. There, while we still have to be worried about the public health impacts of emissions from that facility, the values are going to be different. That community is completely dependent on that, or maybe completely dependent on that industry. And so what works in the city of Portland won't necessarily work in that community. So again, on this living life on the razor's edge of the urban-rural divide, we need to recognize as part of that what works in some communities won't necessarily work in others. And we need to design our programs so that they keep that in mind. When I was Jim Rue's predecessor in DLCD, and I can't resist doing this, Jim knows what I'm going to say, we continually are berated in our land use program about one size does not fit all. That's also true of our regulatory programs. And just as the land use program has and is adapting to provide room for local governments to make their own decisions about what their communities should look like, we're doing the same thing in the regulatory sphere. Thanks very much.